Thank you for selecting this week's message by Shane Craven. If you'd like more information about additional Shane Craven resources, just log on to our website at shanecraven.com. Now, here's Shane with this week's message.
Well, good morning. Hope you're doing well. We start a brand new series today. It's exciting to think about first part of the new year. Here we are. And so we start this series called Chazown. It's kind of a funny word, and I'll tell you what it means. But if you've got a Bible, you could go ahead and turn to Acts chapter 20. I'm going to deal with Proverbs chapter 29 for a few minutes, and then we're going to stay with Acts chapter 20. But have you ever noticed, as we kick off this brand new series for a brand new year, have you ever noticed that there are many people that go through life and they just kind of drift along without a plan? They have no vision. They have no real desire to figure out if there's a plan for the life. They just kind of let life happen to them. And they just kind of let it unfold, and they make decisions as they go. It's a lot of people throughout the world. And so here's the statement that we're going to kind of hang around for this message. And here it is, and I want you to listen carefully. Everyone ends up somewhere, but few people end up somewhere on purpose. Everybody ends up somewhere, but very few people end up somewhere on purpose. And so maybe you're here today and you'd say, you know, Shane, I would love to answer a few questions like, you know, where is vision in my life, etc. But I'm sure that if we ask this question, how many of us would like to be financially free to the point that we owed nobody any debt? And if we got to the point that we could very much generously give over and over and over to God's work, we would probably all raise our hand and say, yeah, I'd like to be there. How many of you would say today that I would like to have a marriage that's intimate and that we still have that relationship like we did when we started, and we still like to kiss in movies and stuff like that? We'd all raise our hand and say, yeah, I'd like to have that kind of relationship. Other questions could be raised like, what if I were asked this question? Would you be interested if you could have a walk with God whereby it was a life of faith, and at the end of life you could say, Jesus speaking to you, I did my job for you, God, and He says, welcome home, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful to the task. You've kept the faith. You've won the victory. Or, last but not least, if we ask ourselves this question, if we had a plan for our physical shape, if we had a plan for our diet, the way we felt, the way we administered food to our bodies, we'd all say, yeah, you know, I'd like to not be heavy, or I'd like not to be skinny, and I'd like to be just right. And so everybody has their own perfect little weight, you know, but we'd all raise our hand and say, I'd like to stay in good physical shape. But here's what I want you to know. I can promise you that we will all end up somewhere. And you can end up there, what I just described as a good place to be in all those four examples, but you will not get there by accident. You will get there only on purpose. And it's got to be purposed in your heart. And for me in my life, you know, I've not always purposed to do what I really felt like God wanted me to do, but I want to. You know, it's kind of like the person that says, you know, I don't like to cuss, but I do. I really love God. I'd like to let it fall away faster than it's keeping itself on me. It's kind of like that person that says, I want to do better, and I think better is always better. And so we're getting better every single day. The Bible teaches in Proverbs chapter 29, we're going to refer to this proverb in verse number 18, and you'll see it on the screen, and it says these words. It's one of my favorite texts. Where there is no vision, the people perish. But he who keeps the law, blessed is he. Blessed is he. It's an interesting word, vision. And I like that because it's the word that we title the series, Chazown. All right, it's an old Hebrew word, Chazown.
You've been listening to this week's message by Shane Craven. We look forward to you joining Shane again at your convenience for another message that is real, is relevant, and is retro to live the life of hope in today's times.
But that's what it means. It means vision. It means a dream. It means revitalization. It means revolution. It means hope. It means that thing out there that we have no idea what it is yet, but I feel that it's in my bones. Chazown. Where there is no vision, you will not have that type of intimate marriage. Where there is no vision, you will not ever be financially free. Where there is no vision, you will never be the shape you want to be. You must visionize where you want to be and where you want to go and find a step, a path, a way to get there. And so here's the statement. None of us got here by accident. I believe that we're living in the day, and you're here for a reason. We're all here for a reason. We are here not by accident, but this is the time that God wants to use us more than ever before. Today is the time that He wants to use you more than ever before. And who's to say, who's to know that this fragile new church called Origin is not the place that you and I have all come together to springboard and trampoline out into life to do the exact thing that God called us to do? How are we to know that this is not that time? I believe now is the time to be used mightily of God. I always love this question. I've used it through the years, and you've heard it. If money were no option in your life and my life, what would you do with the rest of your life? If money were no option, and you had a blank check, and it was no big deal, and like Zuckerberg that owns Facebook, you know, he just lives in a modest little house. I just noticed that he just moved over there in Palo Alto, but he's got this security system. It's probably invisible all the way around the house, but it looks like the neighborhood you and I would live in. He doesn't care about money. He's only worth about $7 billion. And so he has no need to worry about money. What would you do if you were Mark Zuckerberg, and you had $7 billion and you could spend the rest of your life doing anything you wanted to do? What do you think that might be? See, I believe that as we deal with this series of passion and vision and purpose, we've got to find, first of all, we've got to pursue the passion that we have. But before we can pursue the passion, we've got to discover the passion that we have. And so you weren't wired to just be flopped around through life, letting life deal with you like it wants to. You were not wired that way. God did not make you that way. And so let me ask you this question. Do you really think, a lot of people answer that question about money across the globe, and they normally answer with things like this. Believe this or not. Here's the summary. They'll say things like, well, if I had $7 billion or money were no issue, I'd go on vacation all the time. And secondly, they'll say, I would probably buy a new home. And thirdly, they say, I would buy a new boat. Now, let me ask you this. Do you honestly think that God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, sent Him to a cross, allowed Him to die for you and me, blood spilled out on the ground, He literally died, stayed in a grave for 3 days, and then He rose again for you and for me to show us that He had all the power known to man because He created it? Do we really think that that's why we were created? To just have more vacation time? Is that what God made us for? In fact, if you look at all the greats in the Bible, from a guy named Moses, if you've not studied the Bible very much, there's a guy named Moses in the Bible. There's a guy named David. There's a gal named Esther, a guy named Paul, and a guy named Nehemiah. If you study these guys, you will notice something that is kind of the scarlet thread that runs throughout their life. They all had a vision. They all had a purpose. They all had a dream. They all had a revelation for their life. And they experienced 4 distinct phases on this journey to get where they were going and getting where they wanted to go in their life. And it's right out of Acts chapter 20 that we're going to discover today. And so let me give you the context before I read Acts chapter 20 about what's going on in Acts chapter 20. That's where we're going to spend our time. Acts chapter 20 is a guy named Paul that I mentioned. He was a guy that used to hate the church, but then he became a believer. He became a follower of Christ. And he becomes so good at following Christ that he begins to launch ministries all over the place. And so here he's writing in Acts chapter 20 to a group of people that he helped launch this ministry, and he loves the ministry. He loves the work. He loves the people. He loves what's going on there. But inside of him is this chazown that's going on. He feels this tug, this pull, this desire to do something different, bigger, stronger, larger, whatever you define it to be. It was the Chazown going on in his life. And so what he does, he gathers all the elders of the church, the leaders of the church, and he says, I don't know what's going on. I would love to stay here the rest of my life. But he says, I've got a pull. I've got a tug inside. I've got a dream that something's going on inside of me. And I'd love to stay here, but I must go. I'm supposed to go. And so that's the whole context of Acts chapter 20 that we're going to deal with. And he said, there's something that God has for me that I've got to pursue. Same in your life and mine. Some of you, God's got something different for you. He's got something bigger for you. He's got something better for you. And it's not just a home, and it's not just a vacation, and it's not just a large bank account, because that doesn't bring you joy. Those things are just tools to get where God would have you really go in your life. And so let me show you 4 phases that all of these guys that I mentioned, the greats, for lack of a better word, they all went through these phases to get through to their Chazown. First thing that happens for you and for me to find our passion and to follow the vision is there's going to be a spirit prompting. All right, that's verse number 22. Watch it on the screen. And the Bible says, the NIV translation, and now compelled by the Spirit, I am going to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me there. Interesting word, compelled. It's a word that is really a 2-word parallel. It's an old Greek word. Again, if you would have read the Bible back in the day and you've read it in the original language, you would have read it in Greek, and you would have read, instead of compelled, it would have been a word phrase called deo, D-E-O, deo pneuma. And deo literally means, it's the Greek word, it could mean bound, it could mean wrapped around with cords, it could mean consumed with, and pneuma is the word that means spirit. It means current of air, breeze blowing by. So you compare those two and compile those two, deo pneuma, and you've got, I am a person that had a spirit prompting, and I'm so bound with cords with it that I am blown about with the wind of the Spirit of God, and I've got to go because He's pulling on me. I'm bound by it. I'm in bondage by it. And the Spirit says, I've got to. I'm supposed to. And that's exactly what Paul was saying in Acts chapter 20. You've all had a deo pneuma moment. It could have been about your family or your job or your health or your fitness. You know, and it's that thing that says, no, I've got to stop that. I've got to fix that. They need me. I'm seeing that. I get that. I can help. Rebecca, it might have happened in the ER to you. Watching something happen, that deo pneuma moment when you just know you're supposed to be a part of the solution. And that was normally what was happening here in these guys' lives, is the Spirit began to prompt us. And you feel it, and you feel the tug, and you're pulled by it, and you don't know really what it is, but it's towards something. I was 17 years old. I remember exactly where I was in Roswell, north of Atlanta. That's where I grew up. And I don't know all that was said that day, but I just remember where I was in the house, and I can just remember that prompting, that urging, that tugging, 17 years old, that God just kind of said, Shane, you're going to be used by me if you'll let me use you. And I'm going to use you in a non-traditional sense, same timeless message, non-traditional sense, because what you've been allowed to see growing up, yes, it's a traditional type sense, but it's very lethargic. People are not giving their lives to Christ, but you are going to be used in a way where people will give their lives to Christ. I can remember that deo pneuma moment, that bonding of the cord around me, the bondage of the Spirit. I didn't know what the future held. I just knew that God was saying something to me along those lines. And so for some of you, you're saying to me today, Shane, I was created for more than I'm living. You know, I know I've got to leave my job. I need to, but I can't keep doing it like I've always been doing it. I'm willing to do it. I feel that I need to do it. There's something. That deo pneuma moving in yours and my life. It happens in our life of Chazown, is there's a Spirit's prompting. Second thing that happens is there is certain uncertainty that happens. Look at verse number 22. In other words, the Spirit speaks to us. We feel that tugging. Feel that drawing? We're moving. We've got to move to another city. We've got to get married to this person. We've got to get in shape for once. And we feel that and we go, but where? How? I don't know if I can even take it. I can't afford to make that move. But verse 22, he says these words, the latter part. And now compelled, we read the first part, Deo Pneuma, by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem. So he makes up his mind. He's being pulled by the Spirit. And here's what he says. It's all of us. Not knowing what will happen to me there. Everywhere I've ever been pulled and tugged to go, 20 years of ministry, I've always been nervous. Fear has always risen to the top. David, it is always a feeling of, oh gosh, what if we don't relate? What if we don't fit in? What if we don't adjust? What if, what if, what if? No different, Acts chapter 20, verse 22. Fear can overtake faith. We've just got to press it down. What happens in the mind is fleshed out in the body. It starts right here. And so I've just got to say, I know we will. And over 20 years, I can assure you of one thing. Every time we've ever been tugged and pulled, Deo Pneuma moment, our kids have always said, Daddy, I'm not going. You go. You can go without me, but I'm not going. And every single time, we're nervous for them. They've always adjusted. They've always met new friends. They've always had ministry. They've always influenced people. They've always had a group of people. And every single time, just about, they always said, I don't want to go to the next place. I'm staying here. Deo Pneuma. Certain uncertainty. It's part of it. I remember Jeff, he was driving, or not driving, he was a little bitty boy. And if I got my story straight and I remember correctly, he was learning to ride a bike. He's a little bitty. And he was trying real hard. He had those training wheels like we all did. And my dad, I think, wasn't this not right, Kim? He had his hand on the back of the seat. And he was pushing. And all of a sudden, you know how kids are. Let go. Let go. I can do it. And he lets go and he takes off like a bat, you know, right out there riding a bike. And like we've all done at some point, I can do it. I can balance. And you know what that part of life is? It's kind of like, yeah, uh-oh, yeah, uh-oh, yeah, uh-oh. And it's kind of that shift back and forth to this is great, uh-oh, kind of like sledding this week, guys. We watch our kids go down an embankment where trees are and they go, yeah, this is fun. Yeah, this is fun. But uh-oh, there's a tree down there I've got to avoid. You know, it's that Deo Pneuma. This is it. This is awesome. But we've got a problem. Houston. I want you to notice that in this text, I believe that what is the real power of Acts chapter 20 to me is the latter part of verse 22, not knowing what will happen to me there. Here's what it's called, the power of the next step. That's what we want to teach you in this series, the power of the next step. I've always said, you know, when I've talked to God through the years, and I tell people this all the time, I'm afraid that anytime God speaks to me or I read in His Word or I feel like He's prompting me that Deo Pneuma moment, I feel like that I'll mess it up if I get in God's way. And so the way I pray is I say, God, shut every single door but the one you want me to go through because I'm liable to mess things up. Shut every girl in my life that I'm not supposed to marry and don't let me waste time dating them. Maybe a time or two because it would be nice to have a homecoming date, but not for very long because I don't want to waste my time. Lord, don't let me go to the next ministry by having all kinds of options. Just keep in front of me the one that you want me to go to. Same with your job, same with your friends, where you live, your family, everything. God, make it that clear because we will mess it up if we get in God's way. We're just not that smart to say no, and we're not that smart to just immediately say yes. We have to take the power of the next step. and you just keep going with the power of the next step. Here's the phrase, and I like this one. Listen to this. I will do today what I can do to enable me to do tomorrow what I can't do today. I will do today what I can do to enable me tomorrow to do what I can't do today. And so what happens is tomorrow's going to come, but it doesn't get you where you want to do, where you want to go unless you get done what you need to do today. And so it's kind of like the old phrase, I do all I can with what I've got, where I am right now. God help me to do today what I can do to enable me to do tomorrow what I can't do today. And so all of a sudden you end up on purpose where you need to be. And so many of you have a vision, but you have no plan to get there. You've taken the first step, but here's what you do. A lot of times we stop at the first step and we say, God, advance me to step 5. He won't do that. But God, give me more details. No, you've not taken the first step. You and I have to get out of the boat and into the water and feel some pain and put some skin in the game if He's going to put some in. See, it's not fair for you to put some in and Him not to put any in. It's also not fair for God to put skin in the game and you not to put any in the game. And you're just saying, God, you've just got to take me up on a cloud. God, you show me, make it very clear. I will never move. I will never purpose to change unless you make it that clear. That's not faith. And so He leads us to this third phase. Spirit prompts us. We say, all right, I feel that. Then I've got this uncertainty about, I'm having second thoughts. I don't know. How are we going to do it? And then the inevitable happens, and it's called predictable resistance. Let me say it an easier way. This is where, when you do and you begin to head toward the next step of what God would have you do, this is where all hell begins to break loose. This is no fun. We launched this church a couple of years ago. I can remember meeting Jeff and his family, and early on in the ministry, I find out one night he calls and he says, I've just had a wreck. I'm upside down in my car. One thing after another happened like that. We've got the list. It's a mile long of things. He was safe, but he was upside down in his car on a rainy day for no reason. You shouldn't have been there, Jeff. Predictable resistance. Verse number 23, let's look at it. I only know that in every city the Holy Spirit warns me that prison and hardships are facing me. Now I'm not telling you or me prison is facing you. That was the context of Acts chapter 20 with Paul. He was in and out of prison for doing the right thing. But hardship is where most of us experience prison. The valley is where most of us experience prison. The moment you put it on the calendar, the moment you trust Christ as your Savior, the moment you say, yes, I'm doing that, yes, I'm resigning, yes, I'm going to marry her, yes, we're going to get our finances in order, yes, we're going to follow Dave Ramsey's advice and go to the envelope system and live by cash, yes, we're going to have that kind of relationship with God that I'm not going to waffle back and forth and not going to always be discontented and not going to always be changing jobs and not going to always be saying, but there's got to be more. The moment you put it on the calendar is the moment that the enemy will begin to try to talk you out of what you just decided to do. Happened to Pharaoh, it happened to Joseph. Joseph had this big vision. He had this big dream for his life, and his brother said, we like your coat, but we don't like you. Throw him down in a pit. Nehemiah, remember him? If you've studied much at all about him, immediate resistance. He feels God has called him to this mission of rebuilding a wall. And all of a sudden, two guys, I would call them two church members, walk in and say, Nehemiah, hey, could you come down? There's no way you're going to rebuild that wall. In fact, it's impossible to rebuild that wall. Could you just come down? Because we need to talk to you. We need to meet you in your office. We've got some things we're not happy about here. And so Nehemiah recognizes these two guys for what they are. Vision had met resistance. All hell would begin to break loose. And he says to these guys, no, I'm not coming down. I have a work to do. I have a vision to accomplish. I have a dream to do exactly what God called me to do. Hey, the moment you decide that you're going to have a godly marriage and you begin to pray together, which is hard for any husband and wife to do because you know each other so well, normally you know what happens? A fight breaks out. somewhere during the week, shoes fly across the room, and well, there goes the prayer. Or you decide that all of a sudden you're going to have a good financial future. Guess what happens? Friday, the heating element in your dryer breaks down, and it's a foreign dryer, and it costs you $244. Just after you decided to get yourself together financially. And last but not least, you've just decided here in the new year to get your weight in order and your eating in order, and then it snows. And you go to the grocery store and you say, Kim, we're going to get some good cookies and some good donuts. It's zinger time. They're 75% off. I don't care what they cost. We are going to have some good food during this time. Just when that happens, and you put it on the calendar, stuff happens. But I would say to all of us, when that happens, press through. Keep going. Keep getting up in the morning. Keep showing up for duty. Pause, but press on. Pause, but press on. Do it anyway. You know the song that says, do it anyway? When people tell you you can't do it anyway. You pause, but you press on. That's what you do when the enemy tries to deconvince you that you can't make it. You can't do it. But here's the fourth theme that happened to these guys. And here's what it's called. Interestingly enough, it's called uncommon clarity. And so you and I get the call from God, and we get this prompting of the Spirit, that Deo Pneuma moment. And then all of a sudden we're kind of stepping out into the boat with uncertainty. But God, how am I going to feel? I'm not sure if I want to move back to North Georgia. I'm not sure if I want to move to East Texas. I'm not sure I want to go to California. But we signed. Remember, Bill Bright used to call it the slave contract. And when we gave our lives to Christ, literally he says, we signed a slave contract with God that we would go anywhere, do anything, say anything, and be His example anytime, any place. And so that fear creeps in. And then we get the resistance, and that's the real attack of the enemy to say, don't plant Origin Church. It's a waste of time. You don't have the funding. You don't have the people. You don't have the stuff to stay with it. You don't have the stamina, and you just can't make it. And so that resistance happens, and then here's what happens. Last, uncommon clarity. Look at verse 24. You got to feel the power of the statement of verse 24, and here's what he says. However, I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given to me, the task of testifying to the good news of God's grace. And so the Deo Pneuma moment. Listen, so what that means to me is, Shane, the moment you gave your life to Christ, he died. Shane died. And so I don't get a vote. I don't get to choose where I go, what I do, how I respond. If I've signed on to God, if I'm doing what He's called me to do, the power is I can see it. I feel the Deo Pneuma moment. And we respond like this. But I'm not sure I can afford to tithe my income to God. But I'm not sure I can afford to take time off to resign my job and move to that place that God called me to move. I'm not sure I've got enough faith. I just don't know if I can do it. But when you've got the clarity that this is what I was created to do, this is what I was made to do, you can endure the pain and you can stay with the temptation. When you know you're doing what you were called and created by God to do. But see, you normally won't last. People have said it for years. I remember struggling with the call to the ministry, and people would say, Shane, if you can do anything else and be happy doing it and have peace doing it, if you can be in sales, if you can do what you do right out of college like you've always wanted to do, and you can just have joy and you can experience that with a lot of passion, that's what you do. Don't ever go into the ministry if you can do those things and have joy. But if you can't, and you feel that tug, that Spirit prompting, you've got to do what God called you to do. And so for whatever it is in your life, for me, you know, there have been so many times that I thought about doing something else along the journey because of that resistance. Knew I had the prompting. But the resistance, Jeff, would get so heavy that I would think, maybe I've just run the course. Maybe we've just kind of had our chapter, our season. We've done our duty. And then maybe that dryer breaks times 10. And God says, those decisions you're thinking about making, you can make them. But I won't go with you. And you can do that if you want to. But I won't join you. And I will still love you, and you will still meet me in heaven one day, but you will not have the power and the prompting and the Spirit of God on you like you once had. There will be a loss if you choose your own way. And so I believe that when the dryer breaks, if God can use that to get our attention, fabulous. Normally for you and me, the way we're wired, it takes 10 times that type of trial to get our attention. And so it's this uncommon clarity that happens. We can endure the pain. I've heard people say to me, Shane, man, I wouldn't have done what you do. I wouldn't pastor churches for 20 years. And to me, it's like, man, I've just been in my groove. I've just been in the lane. It hadn't always been easy. It's very hard. But I don't feel like it's tempting. I don't feel like it's so painful. Kim even has said many times, our journey's been so awesome. And yet to the naked eye from the outside, they would say, God, how'd you endure all that? How'd you endure all that pain, all that junk, turning a church around? We didn't see it like that. Because you're right in the middle of the passion and the purpose that God called you to. It's just like you doing what you do so well. It's what God made you to do. I might say to Rebecca, who's an ER nurse, God, how do you get up like that in the middle of the night? How do you work that shift? How do you handle all these people with snotty noses every day that complain all day long? You deal with complainers. You deal with people that aren't even sick, with little grandmothers that really aren't sick. They just need somebody to love on them. How do you deal with that person every day? And I would say, I could never do that. But to her, it's what she was made to do. It's what she dreamed to do when she was little. And it comes like the back of her hand. It's what she's passionate about. And so it's this uncommon clarity of verse 24 that says, I don't own my life. My life is nothing to me. Because here's what Paul is saying. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task that God gave me. That's his aim. And so if money were no object, what would you do with the rest of your life? What would you do with the rest of your life? Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to go ahead and set the appointment. You need to go ahead and take the next step. Devil, you're not going to tempt me with comfort because I'm not living for comfort. You're not going to give me just any old offer. I can't be bought. I'm not living for comfort, devil, anymore. You're not going to just tempt me with making me popular because I'm not living for an audience of many. I'm living for an audience of one. I live for Jesus. And so with that in mind, devil, you can't tempt me with your bag of tricks because I live for an audience of one. Sir Francis Drake made this statement. And he said, disturb us, Lord, when we're too well pleased with ourselves. When our dreams have come true because we've dreamed too little. When we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Sometimes you got to up it a little bit and trust God even more than you ever have in your life. Passion, purpose, vision. You're going to go somewhere. You might as well go somewhere with purpose. Would you pray with me?
You've been listening to this week's message by Shane Craven. We look forward to you joining Shane again at your convenience for another message that is real, is relevant, and is retro to live the life of hope in today's times.